Just like this year's Blazers team, Chauncey Billups started the season strong. He looked like a creative defensive mastermind to start the year, as the Blazers had some good defensive performances en route to a 10-4 start, and then everything fell apart. Today's video is going to be talking about Chauncey Billups' positives and negatives as a coach. It's going to be my honest review on him in a bunch of different aspects. But before we get into it, this video is sponsored by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your #1 source for all your NBA playoff betting needs this postseason. Get analysis of every play, prop, and point at BetOnline. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE to receive your bonus. That's BLEAV for 50% rewards. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. Now, as we talk about Chauncey, I'm going to start with the positives. And yes, for those of you who can't stand him, there are some positives with Chauncey Billups. For whatever reason, he seems to be able to empower fringe rotation players, some young NBA players. The play of the guys on 10-day contracts to end the season was a little bit eye-opening, but we've seen Chauncey Billups get this team playing well when the season's already kind of lost. I have no idea why that is or what I can credit Chauncey with, but the way Skylar Mays came in and played, Jonathan Williams, this team looked really solid down the stretch in a lineup that absolutely should not have been solid. But I think this goes towards the bigger positive that I think Chauncey has, which is I do think that the Blazers have a good culture around them, and I do think that players like playing for Chauncey Billups. I don't think it's a situation where he's ever lost the locker room. I don't think it's a situation where players don't believe in him. If you listen to guys like Damian Lillard, Yusuf Nurkic, and Jeremy Grant during their exit interviews, they seem to still be high on Chauncey Billups as a head coach, especially their head coach. And in the locker room and in terms of a culture, I don't think Chauncey Billups is anything but a positive there. I do think another positive from this season was Chauncey being able to utilize Dame off the ball a bit. In the past, we've seen Dame get all his stuff from self-creation, isolation, and being a pick-and-roll ball handler, but I think Chauncey Billups did a really good job this season as to mixing up the usage of Damian Lillard, and I think that's why, in part, Dame had his best statistical season, averaging over 32 points per game. We've been asking for Dame to be utilized off the ball a little bit better, and I think this season he was. And another positive in regards to Chauncey Billups, and this can be extended to his whole staff, but the development of Shaedon Sharpe through the course of the regular season was some of the most drastic development I've ever seen from a player. Now, some of this could be he had no idea how to play basketball and learned a ton this year because the bar was really low coming into the season for him. That could definitely be a big part of that, but Shaedon Sharpe, you also have to give credit to him. Seems like he has a decent work ethic and seems like he can pick things up pretty fast. Joe Cronin raved about that in his exit interview, but you also have to extend some credit to the coaching staff there in regards to Chauncey Billups being in his ear, being a little tough on him, and I do think there was some mistakes that Chauncey made in handling Shaedon Sharpe this season. I'll talk about those in the negatives, but I think in general, the development of Shaedon Sharpe, you do have to give some credit to the coaching staff on that one. And in general, the offense was pretty good, and the Blazers had a really good shot diet. They didn't take a bunch of bad mid-range contested pull-ups. It seemed like they did a pretty decent job of trying to work for good shots. Now, that wasn't always through the most productive offense, which we'll talk about, but a lot of the relentless attacking offense you saw earlier in the year, where you saw a lot of drive and kick, shooting open threes, or attacking closeouts hard, was a bit refreshing compared to offenses of years past. And I do think that style is better in the playoffs than isolation and stagnant offense. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see if that was true, but I do think Chauncey Billups has a decent grasp on how offenses win in the NBA. I just think there's some things that he needs to improve, which we're going to get into right now. But first, if you have any other positives that I did not list for Chauncey Billups, let me know down in the comment section below. I'd love to read what else you think he did well this season. What are some other positives in regards to him as a head coach? But now let's look at the negatives, and since I just talked about it, I do think one of the negatives on the offense was how often this team seemed to get out of a set structure offensively. It seemed like a lot of their actions were very short and quick hitting, which is fine to have some quick hitters, but you also need to be able to play beyond them if they don't work, and a lot of the Blazers quick hitters seem to have gotten shut down and weren't super versatile. They didn't seem to run a lot of lob plays for a guy like Shaedon Sharpe. It seemed like a lot of screen away, Sharpe or Dame or Ant comes to the ball and then they make something happen. I do think that NBA teams need to know how to play in freelance outside of a set offensive structure. So working on that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think the Blazers need to have more structure next season with their offense. I think they need to have more sets with a second, third, fourth option, or a set where if the first option isn't there, it develops into something else. A lot of the sets just seem like too much of a quick hitter. Sometimes they'd work, but when defenses shut them down, such as the high horn screens set by two guys on both sides of Dame's defender, and then he just try and make a play going downhill. If the Blazers' initial actions were shut down this year, I think they really struggled to generate good offense and became quite stagnant. So that is something for Chauncey to look at going into next year. Defensively, I think Chauncey ran way too much zone, and I think he made a mistake all season long by having Dame and Ant a lot of times as the bottom part of the zone, which made it even harder for a zone to rebound. And that's a problem with zone defenses, is since you're not lined up man-to-man, the box outs aren't always obvious and there's gaps for guys to crash the offensive glass through. So I think Chauncey over-relied on zone too much this year, but I do think part of that was because it wasn't like there was a scheme that really worked for this team defensively this season. Hopefully, if they can figure out a base man-to-man scheme next year that is productive, Chauncey won't feel the need to rely so much on the zone defense that he used this year, which worked to start the season, and then it got scouted, and then it got absolutely eviscerated the rest of the year. Another thing defensively that drove me crazy was the usage of Jeremy Grant as an on-ball defender. Jeremy Grant constantly got screened out of plays this year. We talked about it before the season. Screen navigation was not a strong suit for Jeremy Grant, and unfortunately, it seemed like this organization didn't realize that going into the season, and then even as it was a struggle all season long, they didn't adjust it. And Chauncey Billups said that he likes having length on guards because in part it bothered him when he was a point guard to be going up against a lengthy defender that can move his feet. But in the NBA, which has become even more pick and roll dominant and more spaced out, you have to have a guy that can navigate screens as your primary on-ball defender, and Jeremy Grant is the worst screen navigator maybe on this entire team. Jeremy Grant's strengths as a defender are playing in the gaps, being a team defender, and then being a guy that can rotate over as a secondary rim protector and make things tough around the rim. However, when he's trying to chase quicker guards through screens that he struggles getting through, he was getting completely screened out of plays, and then it was a double negative because Jeremy Grant wasn't around the rim to help Yusuf Nurkic protect it. And the Blazers gave up one of the highest rates of shots at the rim in the league all season long. A big part of this was the usage of Jeremy Grant. I would have rather have seen Damian Lillard or Anthony Simons get caught up on screens, but then Jeremy Grant being there to help protect the rim at least. And honestly, Dame and Ant get through screens better than Jeremy Grant does. So going into next season, and part of this is roster construction, the Blazers need to find a primary on-ball defender that is not Jeremy Grant. That'll probably be a small forward that they bring in, but also at some point Chauncey needs to realize that Grant just struggles way too much getting through screens. And it should have been something that Chauncey switched up at times this year, and he didn't. Now the fourth and final negative, and there's probably more, but you guys can let me know if there was any other negatives from this season. But the fourth and final negative is the minutes that he gave certain guys this season. I talked about how Sharpe developed well this season, but Chauncey didn't handle him perfectly, and that is because of some of the stretches where Sharpe would only play 3 minutes and a half after having a good game, and his minutes kind of bounced around, and you'd have games where Nasir Little would be playing well and only play 12, 13 minutes. And there was a stretch there between mid-November and the end of December where Dame, Ant, and Grant, I felt like were getting run into the ground. And then after games, Chauncey Billups would talk about how he felt like guys were just tired, but a big part of that was because he was making them tired. He wasn't playing the bench enough, and Chauncey didn't have a good enough bench, and that was talked about in exit interviews. But still, you can't run your starters into the ground then complain about how they're ran into the ground. So I don't think Chauncey did a good enough job handling minutes and roles this year. Hopefully that's something that he'll improve on. And actually, I do have one more negative because I definitely have to touch upon this as well. Situational defense at the end of games was absolutely terrible. If you watched my seasonal recap video video, I had stream highlights talking about a couple of them. The two that stick out were two games that were close to each other and kind of started the downturn of this season. It was the November loss to the Dallas Mavericks, where the Mavs went small in the final 3 minutes and Eubanks had already played 30 minutes and Chauncey kept him on the floor and he just couldn't keep up with the small ball unit and they were just passing the ball around and shooting open threes because of it. That made no sense, and that kind of goes into the handling of minutes that Chauncey struggled with this year. Like, if Eubanks has already played 30 minutes and they go small and their biggest player on the court is like Dorian Finney-Smith, I think it was, just sub Eubanks out of the game and go small. Sub in Nas or Jabari Walker. It made no sense to keep Eubanks in the game there, so that was one of the late game defensive situational mistakes that Chauncey Billups made this year. Another one of them was that November loss to the Brooklyn Nets, where on a final defensive possession, both Dame and Anthony Simons were in the game, and they ended up being the two guys under the hoop to try and box out Royce O'Neal, who ended up getting the game-winning tip-in. Later in the season, there was a couple of late-game defensive situations where Chauncey put out better defensive lineups, but it shouldn't be a question as to, will our head coach put out our undersized backcourt that is questionable defensively on a final defensive stop? And it got to the point where you had to worry if Jeremy Grant would be on the ball and Dame and Ant would have to be the guys rebounding. I think in general, Dame and Ant got stuck defending the interior far too much this season, whether it was in the zone, whether it was with Jeremy Grant guarding guards and one of them guarding a forward, or whether it was just situational stuff like that. Anyway, let me know what you think of Chauncey Billups down in the comment section below, but I challenge you, if you have a thought on Chauncey, make it detailed. Talk about basketball. Don't just sit down there and say, Chauncey sucks, he's this, he's that. Talk about specific things that you liked from Chauncey this year or specific things you didn't like. I'm hoping that I can read the comments and it'll expand on this video, because coaching is a tricky thing to analyze and there's a lot of things that go into it. So let's have a detailed conversation down in the comment section below. Anyway, I appreciate you. Leave the like button on your way out. It helps me out. It helps out the channel, and I'm out of here. Once again, this video was presented by BetOnline. Promo code BELIEVE for 50% rewards. Until next time, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.